All right, welcome to the Q&A. It's good to be back. Hope everyone enjoyed the Hanukkah break. Again, want to welcome to this Q&A. So, question sort of came up about a very complex topic. We'll discuss a little bit and see where this goes. The Torah says a number of places that a Jew does not apply to a non-Jew, but a Jew is not allowed to lend another Jew money with interest. Now, there are a lot of ramifications for this. So meaning, if a Jew would lend another Jew, let's say $100, right? $1,000, doesn't matter the amount. When they lend the money, the agreement has to be that they'll pay it back. Not allowed to lend with interest. In other words, if they borrow 100, though they're obligated to pay back 100. If they borrow 1,000, obligated to pay back 1,000. Now, the problem and the obvious question is the way the world is that if you borrow money, then the other person should be allowed to charge interest. In other words, he's lending you money, or she's lending you money, and now the agreement would be that you can only pay back the amount you borrowed. Now, the Gemara says this isn't logical. This is not the way of the world. The way of the world is you go to anybody, borrow money, especially a bank. They're lending you with interest. Yeah, they're taking the hard-earned money, or not hard-earned, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. They are going to lend you 100% with interest. However much interest doesn't matter. They are going to lend you with interest because the way the world is, if you borrow 100, somebody borrows that money. Yeah, the other person can say, why should I not pay it back with interest? What's the problem? It's the way of the world. Right? The Gemara asks the question. It's the way of the world. So a Jew can charge interest to a non-Jew, but not to another Jew. So now the obvious question is, why? Why would that be? Now, first of all, this is a Torah prohibition. The Torah makes very clear you cannot lend with interest. Very, very clear. Not a rabbinical prohibition. It's a Torah prohibition. Yeah, now there are certain cases that will be rabbinic prohibitions, but straight up, to borrow 100 and pay back 150, Torah prohibition. Now I'm going to tell you how bad the Torah prohibition is. It's so bad that first of all, a person signs a document. Reuven borrows money from Shimon. Reuven borrows 100. They write up a document. Reuven has to pay back 150. Now, because Reuven and Shimon acted in such a way, the punishment is so severe, they do not get up a resurrection of the dead. That's how severe it is. Now, anybody who participates in such a thing, let's say somebody wrote up the document. They didn't borrow with interest. They wrote up the document. Witnesses who sign on the document, they also transgress. They don't lose they do not get up at resurrection of the dead. Yeah, but it's a severe prohibition. Very, very severe prohibition. Now, at face value, question's going to be why? What's the reason? So the Gemara says it's the way of the world. So why should it be forbidden? Right? It should be forbidden because, like any other prohibition, it's a divine decree. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have to try and understand why. Right? Essentially, it's a divine decree. Now, what could be the reason behind it? So imagine a person in dire straits, right? In order for someone to borrow money, For someone to borrow money, they have to be in dire straits. They have to be in need. Right? A person, if everything's going good, relatively speaking, they don't need to borrow money. Now, when a person needs to borrow money, it's not the greatest thing in the world. I'm sure some people have been in that position where, I don't know, they had a bill to pay, something happened, they don't have the money now. They go to someone to borrow, or, God forbid, put on a credit card, and then, that's how people get into credit card debt or whatever. But let's say you had no way to pay it back. Yeah, sorry, let's say better. You had no way to pay whatever this is. So what do? You go to someone for help, right? You ask them for help. Again, you make up an agreement. When are you going to pay it back? How much time do you need? Is the person trustworthy? You might get witnesses. You got, guarantors, right? You get guarantors. You sign agreements. Person doesn't pay. They can go after the guarantors. Yeah, it's a whole process. Now, the person asking, Reuven goes to Shimon and asks for $100. Probably not for $100. Probably $1,000. Maybe more. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the amount is. Again, Reuven is going to try and go to somebody, obviously, has money that can help them. Very good. Now, it's embarrassing. Anyone that's ever been in this situation, it's embarrassing. Yeah, you don't have to go to someone, to ask for help. Why can't you help yourself? Well, you get stuck. Or you don't make enough money, or something happened, whatever it is. It certainly can happen. It's not, it's not because, they're negligent and this and that. And whatever. These are things that happen, right? Again, that's how, people, not everybody, but that's how people get into credit card debt, right? Because they don't have money, whatever. So what do? They borrow. Okay, they have to borrow. Certain things they need, let's say. We're not talking about where they're blowing money, other things. Certain things they need, okay. How are they going to pay it back? Don't worry about it, but certain thing they need now. Yeah, certain thing they need now. So why could it possibly be forbidden? Because the person who needs to borrow money is in trouble. They're in dire straits here, so they have to borrow. So it's embarrassing for them to ask someone for help. So therefore, if they're asking someone for help, the other person, if they can help them, if they have the ability to help them, they should. Now, there's a catch here. What's the catch? The catch is that if someone's going to help them, which, let's say, they could do it. Very good. Very good. So if they can do it, it could be looked at as adding insult to injury. In other words, they know the person needs help. So they say, okay, I'll help you. I can help you. Very good. But I don't want to lose out. So if I help you, it's got to be worth my while. Now, that doesn't sound so good. Right? If you think in those terms, it doesn't sound so good. Yeah? Sounds like, upmanship, or maybe not upmanship, but the person's not feeling compassion for the other person. Why not? Because they fine, I'll help you. Yeah? They can do it with a full heart, but they don't want to lose out. So because they don't want to lose out, what do? They charge interest. Person borrows 1,000. You say, okay, I have 1,000 to give you. I want you to pay me back 1,500. That's within his rights. Doesn't matter what the amount of time is. Give him 6 months, whatever it is. Give him a year, whatever it is. He can say, I'm willing to give you the money, but I don't want to lose out. Right? Now, on the one hand, you're going to say, that's his right. He's giving away his hard-earned money, and he's helping someone else. Why should he lose? There's no reason he should lose. Well, think about it in other terms. The other person needs help. Okay? Yeah, for whatever reason they need help. Doesn't matter. Right? They need help. So now, they ask someone for help, and the other person says, okay, I'll help you. But it has to be worth it to me. If it's not worth it to me, I won't help you. Now, that's bad. That doesn't sound good. That sounds like I'll only help you if it's worth it to me. And if it's not worth it to me, then I won't help you. So again, that could be a reason. I'm not saying it's the reason, right? But as the Gemara says, it's the way of the world. This is a norm. This is what everybody would do. Not being cruel. I want you to die to my money. Very good, but it's going to be worth it to me. Someone says, someone asks someone for help, they can help. Very good. They want it to be worth it to them. They want to make a business deal. Very good. Now, one person's in trouble. The other person has the advantage because he's got the money. So he says, fine. He says, I'll be able to do it. And you'll sign on something that you have, that you own. Let's say, it's collateral. Very good. But if I give you 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, I want, 60% back plus. Right? I want what you borrowed, and I want 60% on top of that. Or I want 70% on top of that. Now, they can ask whatever they want. If they're going to lend out a chunk of money, they want to make sure that they're going to, get a significant return. Yeah, if you're going to offer them 3%, they can say they get 3% in the bank, or 1% in the bank, or 2% in the bank, whatever. So you got to offer them something. Okay, so let's say you offer them 10%. 10% a year on top. Now, they want 20%. They want 40%. They want it to be worth their while. Someone says, listen, if I let someone borrow, I let someone borrow from me, let's say $100,000. Yeah, let's say. So I want, not only I want the 100,000 back, right? Why should I get 100,000 on top of that? I want 100% value back. That's being a little bit, if someone's willing to do it, okay. But that you're giving 100% return. A little bit absurd. Yeah. But, an investor's got money, whatever, so wants to make it worthwhile. I'll give you 50%. Yeah, I'll give you 40%. Over, let's say, 5 years. So like 10% a year, let's say. 13% a year. Not a bad deal. Right? Some people are greedy. It comes to real estate back in the day. People want properties. People want properties 30% under, at least 30% under value. An investor, wouldn't necessarily look at something that's less than 30%. 20%, maybe 25%, maybe. They want properties that they can get, cheap and then flip it or hold on to it and get more money for it later. Right? They're not going to get it, at what the market value is. Why are they taking a market value in general? You're good. You can take over the mortgage. You can do other things. Okay. It's got to be worth their while. If it's not worth their while, why would they do it? So you find, someone, distressed property holder. So you get it at 40% on the value because he has to sell. That's a good deal. Because then you can just flip it to someone else or you hold on to it and you make more money. Right? So people want to make money in general. Now, making money in general is not necessarily a problem. Not necessarily a problem. Yeah, the problem is, if someone's down, again, this is potentially a reason. I'm not going to say it's the reason. Yeah, if they're down and they're in trouble, you'll say, fine, I'll lend you the money. I don't have any problem lending you the money, but it's going to be worth it to me. That does not sound good. That 100% doesn't sound good. Yeah, just the context. Of course I'll help you. I have the ability to help you. Very good. But the person is saying, if it's worth my while, I'll help you. Yeah. They don't want to lose out. They don't want to lose out. That's what they're saying. But it is, it sounds worse when they say, well, if it's worth it to me, I'll do it. And what if it's getting no money back? You're just doing the mitzvah, helping someone else. Well, not everyone's going to be willing to do that. Why not? They don't want to lose out. Right? So the Gemara says it's the way of the world. This is what people do. Because it's what people do, why does the Torah say it's forbidden? Divine decree. Essentially divine decree. Now, This only applies between Jews. Can a Jew lend a non-Jew money with interest? Absolutely. Right? Can a Jew borrow from a non-Jew with interest? Absolutely. It's not a problem. It's between Jews, it's the problem. Now, if you have a Jewish owned, let's say a Jew buys a washing machine, buys a dryer, buys a fridge, I don't know. Jewish owned company. So the fridge, let's say it's $500. So they tell you, if you pay me up front, if you pay the whole thing, it's $500. But I'll give you an option. And the option is I'll let you pay $500, let's say in installments. Yeah, but it's gonna come out to like $750. It's gonna come out to $800 altogether. Yeah, that is forbidden. Now, why is it forbidden? Because the other person is adding more money than what the thing is worth, and they're holding the money back. They're lending you the money, and you're paying interest on that money. Because it's not really money; it's the value, right? It's the value of the thing. The value is $500. That's the value. But the problem is, I'll give you 6 months worth of installments, and with 6 months worth of installments, you're going to pay me more. Yeah, because you really should pay the money up front. Good. If the amount was the same, if let's say they say, okay, I'll take 100 down, and you can pay 400 in installments, 4 installments. You pay $100 a month. Very good. That's not lending with interest. Why? Because it's the same price. Exact same price. So anytime you have a Jewish-owned company and you're involved with them, this can come up. Or let's say here in Israel, let's say you got a bill to pay, but they don't have money to pay it. So what do? They fine you. Right? They fine you. That's a problem. That 100% is the problem. Person, it's better obviously to pay it up front. Right? Pay it before it's due. What if you don't have money? What if you don't have a credit card to put it on? Well, that's no problem. Right? The people say do whatever you can to cover it so you don't have that problem. Not always so easy. But you're onto that issue. Let's say you borrow money by house. It's also with interest. Right? There are some ways around that, what they call a heter iska, that they're using the money. They're using the money and they're profiting from the money and they're investing the money. So not just you're taking a loan. I mean, you are taking a loan, right? But you have something around it where you sign an agreement saying they have a right to invest in it, whatever. It's more like a business deal. It's not like you're borrowing money per se, right? There are ways around it, but even if you use this, the bank itself, if the bank agrees to do this, which certainly most banks here have that, yeah, they have to believe in it. It's kind of a problem in a certain way because the owner of banks today are not so religious. Yeah, so they're not so religious, but they do it for their religious clientele. Yeah, they're helping their religious clientele over here. Very good because they want the business. But what if they themselves, again, that's a whole separate topic I don't want to necessarily get into, but let's just say they have this, what we call a heter iska. So let's say they have this business agreement. It's really a loan. But they're benefiting from the loan. They're investing the loan. So it's more like an investment. It's looked at more as an investment than a loan. Okay. So even if we say that's okay, what if they themselves, they're just doing it for the sake of their ultra-Orthodox clientele. But really, they don't believe in it. They're doing it for show. Yeah, so to speak. And that's a problem. It's also a problem. Yeah. In other words, if I have this general thing, this general document, but they themselves don't really believe in it, it's only for show, how does that work? Why should that work? They don't believe in it. But they sign off on it. Very good. They sign off on it, but they're only doing it for business purposes, not because they believe in any religious thing or whatever. So that's also simple. That's also simple, right? There are rabbinic authorities would hold that you can't do that. You can't borrow money from them. Yeah? You wouldn't be able to do that because they don't believe in it. It doesn't matter if you sign on it, they sign on it, and whoever else signs on it. They don't believe in it. Yeah? Now, if that would be the case, I mean, there are rabbinic authorities that hold this, right? So if that would be the case, someone here, let's say, someone in Israel, any Jewish-owned bank, whatever you borrow money for, let's say you borrow money for a house, even better. Yeah, you borrow money for a house because you don't have it, you don't have all the money. Yeah, you don't have all the money. Very good. How are you ever going to buy a house? You're never going to be able to buy a house because you need a significant amount of money. Even if you have 10, 20% to put down, very good. Where's the other 80% coming from? You don't have it, right? And you're not going to have it. That's why, that's exactly why you borrow the money. Why banks make their money, yeah? So that's exactly why you borrow it. Yeah, so if you had the money, you wouldn't borrow. Okay. 100% you wouldn't borrow. Very good. Yeah, so that would also be a problem. But there are rabbinic authorities hold that if they sign on it, whatever they think about it doesn't matter. They signed on it. So it's a good deal. Right? So it would work. That's what you have to say. Otherwise, most people would never borrow money from the banks and they'll be renting their whole lives. They'll never have enough money to buy. Right? They'll never have enough money to buy. So I'd say borrowing from a bank, a Jewish-owned bank would be, is an issue. Buying in installments where you're paying in installments for the higher price, that's definitely problematic. And that comes up. That's not as uncommon as people think. Now, if it's a non-Jewish owned bank or you're dealing with non-Jews, it's not a problem. Right? It's definitely not an issue. But it's whatever. It's probably one of the more difficult topics within definitely within Judaism. Extremely complex, right? But I just highlighted a few things. Let me see their questions here. Somebody asked one second. Somebody asks, why can the Jew not charge interest? That I answered. Torah prohibition, rabbinic prohibition. So to lend money straight up with interest, Torah prohibition. 100% Torah prohibition. What I mentioned before is probably rabbinic prohibition. Yeah. The other types of rabbinic prohibitions also. Let's say, you borrow money from someone, very good. And let's say it's done without interest. And a person like starts throwing all these compliments to them, praising them. Yeah. So you're gonna say, well, that's not lending with interest, that's not a problem. You already borrow money, let's say without interest. Yeah, but there's such an idea as ribis devarim. Ribis with words. Right? So in other words, the person praises the person. Why are they praising them? Praising them because they helped them. They helped them with what, they're in dire straits. They helped them, they saved them. Very good. Yeah. So you're thanking them or you're doing them a favor. Let's say you do a favor for them because they lent you the money. Yeah. Let's say that's the reason you're helping them. In other ways, you do a favor for them. You would have done the favor otherwise. It can also be an issue, right? So we can all be there are a number of potential issues over here. Is the question, does it have to be on a bill of sale? Is it only on a loan? Yeah, whatever. It's complex. So someone asks, okay, what happens if a Jew cannot pay it back? What happens if he can't pay it back? Well, so let's talk. Let's talk about a loan in general. Ruvain borrows money from Shimon. Yeah. Ruvain, let's say there's no interest in. Ruvain borrows 100, 1,000, whatever it is from Shimon and can't pay it. Now, let's say Shimon gives him an opportunity to pay it in installments. Okay. So let's say he gives him a certain amount of time. And let's say Ruvain still can't pay it back. Now, in a normal case, a person, when they borrow money, what's going to happen? The one he's borrowing from will want guarantors. Now, if this thing drags on and he can't pay it, and the person he lent the money, obviously he's not going to forego it, right? He wants the money back, so what does he do? At some point, you don't have to take him to court. No reason to take him to court over here. He goes to the guarantors. He tells the guarantors, listen, you signed on this loan. He's not paying it back. I want you to pay it. Split it, whatever it is, right? I want the money. They can do that. They absolutely have the right to do that. Now, this is one reason people don't want to sign as guarantors. Because what if the guy doesn't pay back? What happens if the guy doesn't pay back? So then you're stuck with the loan. Yeah, he's got to pay it back. 100% he's got to pay it back. Now, the question's going to be, what if he's in such financial straits? What happens if he declares bankruptcy? Now, in secular law, in general, person declares bankruptcy. People have claims, they owe them money. That's it, it's gonzo. They declare bankruptcy. Now, it's not a good thing. You won't be able to open up a bank account for years, and your credit's shot and all that. Okay, but you may not have a choice. Person may not have a choice. Now, the question is, does bankruptcy work according to Jewish law? Reuven borrows 1,000 from Shimon. Get all these debts piled up. He's got no choice. Declares bankruptcy. Shimon says, I don't care to declare bankruptcy. You owe me money. I want the money. Does bankruptcy in secular law trump oral law? Does it trump the Torah over here? A person owes money to a whole lot of people. They declare bankruptcy. Not a good idea unless you have no choice. Well, let's say you do it. Let's say you do it. What does that mean? That means you're exempt from paying. That's what it means. You have no money to pay, they can't come after you. They cannot come after you. Or a person has credit card debt after a certain amount of time. Yeah, there's a certain amount of time they can't harass you anymore. Right? Statute of limitations. Different number of years in each state. Some are the same, some not. They have collection agencies, let's say. At a certain point, let's say, whatever state a person lives in, it's statute of limitations 5 years. They start hounding you after 5 years. After 5 years, they can't hound you anymore. They can't hound you anymore. Now, if they do, you can prosecute them. You can prosecute them for harassment. They don't have any legal binding way to get to you. Yeah, in general. Now, obviously, better pay it back. Right? If you can pay something back, better pay it back. Collection agencies be very happy to get 10, 20% on the dollar if they have no choice. They want to get something. Yeah? Well, the person has no property. They'll take what they can get. And even if the person has property, can they force them to sell it? That's another discussion. The person doesn't want to sell it. May not have a choice. Okay. Now, the question is, $1 million question here is, if they declare bankruptcy, according to secular law, you don't have to pay anything back. People can come to them, it's too late. They declare bankruptcy. Right? They commit financial suicide, basically, but they feel they have no choice. So they won't be able to open a bank account for years, their credit is shot. Okay. Now the question is, Reuven says, I don't care to declare bankruptcy. You owe me the money, I want the money. Right? According to secular law, you're exempt. 100%, you're exempt. That's what bankruptcy is. You can't pay it back. According to secular law, you don't have to pay. What about the Torah? According to the Torah, you're still obligated. Seemingly, you should be obligated. What if you don't have the money to pay? So you have to work some sort of payment system out. That's what you got to do. You gotta work out a system. Now, what if you owe a lot of people a lot of money? Let's say you owe somebody a lot of money, some people little money. First come, first serve, right? Whoever you borrow the money from first, or you owe the money first, they have first dibs. Seemingly, they have first dibs. Right? But again, technically, the issue could be, if you can't, if you declare bankruptcy, right? According to secular law, you don't have to pay it back. According to Torah, you probably should pay it back if you're able to. Right? Try and work out a system. If you can't work out a system, what can they do? What can they force them to do? Let's say the best case scenario, a person doesn't own property, you own nothing. What are they going to grab from you? Going to come in and take all your possessions? It'd be kind of cruel. to do things. It doesn't matter. You owe the money. Very good. Right? So it'd be an interesting question. A person has that kind of debt, or whatever type of debt. Let's say they have collateral. Let's say they know they have a car. They have a couple cars. They own a home. Let's say. Can they force them to sell the house? It depends how much the debt is and whatever. Does it correspond to what the value is? Can they do that? So that's, the whole discussion. That's the whole discussion if they can do that. But bottom line, you're asking what happens if he can't pay it. So if he's got guarantors, if, let's say, Shimon has guarantors on this document, the guarantors will pay. They could go to the guarantors and have them pay. If, let's say, the guarantor said, I don't have the money, or I only sign whatever, but I'm not paying. I'm not paying. They can take it to court. They can take it to base. It's an open and shut case. He owes the money, and he got guarantors. Right? What would the base din say? What would I guess? The base din will say, get it from the guarantors. They have to pay it. Now, what if the guarantor? Let's say it's a lot of money. The guarantors don't have the money. Then there's the whole question: how can you sign? It's a whole other question. How could you sign on a document knowing you can't pay it back? So some people, for that reason, will not sign. Either that, or they don't trust the person, and they don't have to pay it back. And that's why that's why some people won't sign. Other people will sign regardless. The other person, needs help or whatever, they'll sign. I remember for years I signed for people. I didn't get burnt. Thank God I didn't get burnt. Yeah, you could get burnt. Depends how much you sign off for. That if the person doesn't pay, the person could get burnt. Yeah, but at the end of the day, what happens? It goes to base din. The guarantors don't have money. Yeah, so base din, they'll say this person doesn't have money. And the guarantors can't pay. Usually go after the guarantors. Right? I mean, they're willing to make a system or an agreement. That means they're going to have to pay it all up front. If they can pay it in installments, they'll be happy to get it in installments just to be happy to get it back. But it has to be something reasonable. The basic cannot come and say, okay, you owe $20,000. You don't have a dime to your name. The guy says, fine, I'll pay you $50 a month for 20 years. Forget it. They're not only that, they're not going to if the person's really struggling, they're going to say, okay, $5,000 a month, 4 months, you get to pay it back. They don't have the money. Right? You got to make it reasonable. They got to make some sort of reasonable, agreement. Either it's going to work out that way, or the guarantors will pay it. They work out an agreement with the guarantors. But it has to be paid. Right? It has to be paid. Now, even if they declare bankruptcy, they still should pay it. They should still pay it somehow. You just work out a system. Work out a system on what you're going to pay a month, if possible. Now, what a person says, I can't guarantee that. They have to guarantee something. So which gets into another question, and that is, a person's struggling, whatever, can they borrow money? They have no idea how they're going to pay it back. So that you shouldn't do. Right? That's obvious you shouldn't do it. Well, we have no choice. Sometimes the person gets a situation they have no choice. Right? Now, let's say you're stuck on all ends. No credit card, no nothing. You're going to go borrowing from other people. Let's say you can find people to borrow from. Okay. So even if you find people to borrow from, you have no idea what's coming back. You have no idea. It shouldn't be done. Well, if it's not, if the person's stuck and it's not done, they're in trouble. Right? Again, I'm not saying it's a good thing to do. Some people end up doing it, get themselves into other trouble, right? Then pay this one to pay that one to pay the other one, and then it's like a never-ending cycle, right? Which is never good. Why'd they get stuck? They didn't have enough money. For whatever reason. I'm not saying, they were blowing the money, this and that. They make a certain amount of money, they live day to day, paycheck to paycheck, few extra major expenses, and now they're stuck. It can happen. 100% it can happen. Yeah, a person loses their job, and now they didn't find a job for a couple of months, and unemployment doesn't cover very much. And they get stuck. Right? Many scenarios. Many scenarios, but they should pay it back. 100%. 100%. They should pay it back. If they themselves don't pay it back, they should have guarantors. If guarantors sign on it, the guarantors should pay back. If the guarantors can't pay back, then what do? And the basis is going to say, try and make a deal. Try and make a deal. How much they can pay back and what's reasonable for what the person owes and what they have. And that's right, make some sort of deal to get the money back, but they should pay it back. It doesn't matter. It takes 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, but they should try and make an effort to pay it back. Right? If possible. Right? Whatever, you run into trouble either way. Right? Right? You run into trouble either way. Someone asked me to grow my beard out. Nope, just got a little bit lazy. Yeah, it's got to trim it. Yeah, let me see other questions here. One second. This comes up a lot. It comes up a lot that people get stuck. Economy's bad, business is bad. A person gets stuck. And sometimes, especially with credit card debt, person runs into a vicious cycle. He says, okay, rely on this credit card to pay this or pay that or whatever. Very good. And they get stuck. And then interest rates are up to gazoo. Right? And they can't pay the minimal payment. They run into trouble. It happens, but a person can say, well, it's bad planning, it's bad. Sometimes there's circumstances in life that a person gets stuck. Not their own fault. Right? They had medical bills. Or they had a lot of medical bills. Yeah, no idea how they're going to pay that either. Yeah, somehow, whatever. Pay that, but, what do you do? Then you have to, you still have to live. Person with a bunch of kids, marry off your kids. Also not cheap. Either way. Right? It's one thing, you make your ends meet, very good. Wedding expenses, all totally different issue. Right? It's a totally different beast. So, people go into debt. Now, how serious debt? Someone once told me, I mean, it's horrific. Someone once told, I shouldn't laugh. Someone once said, my father died, you know what the inheritance was? Inheritance was $350,000 of debt. Now, there's a whole question, without breaking it down, but there's a whole question, if a parent died and they have debts, do the children have the obligation to pay it? Whatever, it's not a small question. Or let's say even better, let's say, parents are older, they struggle. Do the children have an obligation to help them? Absolutely. If they can. Not saying they have to necessarily put themselves in the debt to do it. But if they have the ability, if they have the ability to help the parents are struggling tremendously, let's say, I don't know, let's say a lot of medical bills, different things, the kid should help. 100% they should help. They'll say it's not my obligation, it's their own problem. They raised you, they brought you into this world. I'm not talking about where you hate their guts and you want them to die. Yeah, not talking about that. In general. Right? In general, it's a Torah obligation, not a rabbinic obligation. Not that it matters. But the Torah obligation honoring parents. If they struggle, you should help them. You have an obligation to step in and help them if you can. Or you can find other people too if you can't. For the sole reason they brought you into this world, they raised you. Doesn't matter, psychological abuse, other things, you should help them. Now, it's going to be hard for some people. Guaranteed. Well, again, let's say there's no abuse, no psychological abuse, whatever. You should want to help the parents to the best of your ability. And if you're struggling yourself, very good. Yeah. So then, then you have a greater obligation to find people to try and help. Yeah. If you can't do it yourself. Now, what's the reason they brought you in this world? For better or for worse, they brought you in this world. You should try and help them. Now, someone says, they gamble, they're alcoholics, they just waste the money, now they're in trouble. Okay, maybe that's a little bit different issue. I'm not talking about that. There's difficulty. Let's say someone, I don't know, someone has some sort of handicap. They can't work. They're on disability. They're on disability. Yeah? Something major goes wrong in the house. Something major goes wrong in the house. They don't have the money for that. 100% they don't have money for that. Right? If they don't have money for that, where's the money going to come from? It's not going to come out of thin air. Even though people say there's money growing on trees in America, well, not necessarily true. Yeah, so how are they going to pay for it? Because that was their problem. Okay. But they're on limited income. You should help them if you can. Does that mean you have to go in debt? Doesn't mean you have to go into debt. That doesn't mean that. Right? Nonetheless, what do? You do what you can do. And if you can't do it yourself, right? Similarly to a person that has kids to educate, right? So if they can't teach them or they don't have the knowledge, what should they do? Hire somebody. You got to hire somebody because you got an obligation to teach them. And if you can't teach them, you find someone to teach them. Now, again, the person's going to put themselves into debt. You do what you can do. We can't say, well, I don't have money, I'm not going to teach them. That's the only way they're going to get to Torah mitzvahs. Someone has to teach them. It's a parent's obligation, a father's obligation to teach them. What if they don't know? What if they don't have the knowledge? Or they don't have the time, or both? They have to hire somebody. You have to hire, within reason. Kids have to be educated. It's a Torah obligation. For a parent to educate a child. Torah obligation. Yeah, certainly for Jews, right, to obligate their kids. I say by non-Jews should also educate their kids in the right way. If they choose to go that way, not that way, okay, but, try and educate them as best as possible. Now, sometimes people come to this much later in life and kids aren't going to listen. Okay, you still do what you can do. Propaganda never goes to waste, but, at the end of the day, when they're older, it's harder, right? It's definitely harder. Someone asks, still this question first, if someone does waste the money, expects the kids to take care of them, that's a problem. That's a problem. Yeah. If a person would just take all their money and throw it in the garbage. You do it, the child should try and stop the parent if they can. Sometimes you can't. Let's say someone's addicted to I don't know. They're addicted to gambling. They're addicted to trying to make money online. So they sign up for all these different programs. They'll never make money. Right? They'll tell you how easy it is, whatever, and obviously it's much more complicated. Right? Now, you can try and talk to the parent. You can try to reason with the parents. But addiction's an addiction. If it's and if they're putting themselves in trouble, you don't have an obligation. You do not have an obligation to help them. Yeah, according to the Torah, you don't have an obligation. Again, when I say it's a midas chasidus, it's like it's going beyond the letter of the law to help. I mean, you're throwing your money in the garbage also. 100%. It goes the other way. What about a child? What about a child's drug addict, this, that? They don't want to get their own help and whatever. So, what should the parents do? What should they do? Parents willing to help them, trying to help them. Yeah, try and get the kid to go to rehab. Rehab's not cheap by any stretch, let's say. And the kid falls and falls again, whatever. How many times do the parents pick up the pieces? Even if they have money. But for a parent to a child, I would think they do whatever they can to help the child. Yeah. Drugs is a big problem. Gambling is a big problem. Alcoholism, big problem. How much money does the parent have to spend on a child? You can ask the other way. But you want the child to get better if possible. But then what about mental illness? Well, some of this is mental illness also. So how far does that go? It's a good question. But usually for a parent to a child, they'll try and do whatever they can to save their kid. They'll try. And if the kid doesn't want and they end up on the street and other things happen, that's on the parent's fault. Technically, it's really not their fault. Kid got involved, and whatever happened, happened. But yeah, if the parent has a serious addiction, let's say, kid doesn't have to help them with it. Yeah, they can try and speak to them, get other people speak to them, trying to, get them to detox and, go to rehab and different things. The problem becomes where they can't admit they have a problem. And usually when it comes to an addict, the only time they can admit they have a problem is when they lose everything. Usually. Not all the time. Not all the time. But Abraham Twersky, blessed memory, Rabbi Abraham Twersky, blessed memory, was a big time expert in addiction. That's what he said. He said this many times. A person, in general, if they're an addict, they just about have to lose everything in order to realize they have a problem. Doesn't happen by everybody. But he said, that there's a lot of denial, tremendous amount of denial. But they have to lose a lot for them to realize they have a problem. But he says it doesn't have to come to that. It should never come to that, right? But it does. They lose a spouse, they lose their kids, they lose their house, they're on the streets. Different things. Well, they didn't listen. They don't want to listen. Now, they basically lost everything. So now they have more of an impetus to want to change. So says Rabbi Twersky, that's usually where it starts. By his experience, and he was involved in this, 40, 50 years. Yeah, he was involved in this. And that's what he saw. Now again, he said it doesn't have to be that way. But for a person to admit they have a problem, and they want to try and fix the problem, which is going to be very hard to do, but in order to fix the problem, you have to admit you have a problem. And a lot of people don't want to admit they have a problem. And if they don't want to admit they have a problem, what's going to happen? Their life's going to crumble. They're going to lose important things to them. And then it's going to continue doing it. Hopefully they don't overdose or whatever. And they're going to hit rock bottom. So he says when a person hits rock bottom, then they can listen. Then they have the ability to listen. Not impossible to listen before, but it's harder. Much, much harder. Right? That's what happens. It's unfortunate. It's definitely unfortunate. A child should try to have compassion for the parents. But again, if the parents are blowing the money, and other things, so there is a lot of emotion there. I would say, unless, they're just blowing money and they don't see reason, they don't listen to reason, there's, really not much you can do. You have an obligation to try and intervene, that's for sure. But intervening doesn't always help. The older a person gets, the more stubborn they get. And they don't want to listen, and they want to do their own thing. They still want to do their own thing. Okay, but this is detrimental. This is going to cause serious issues. True? Going to cause a lot of issues, okay. But they don't see that. Or they don't care. Right? Or they don't care. And if they don't care, then what can you do? You can't bring the person, you can't bring the horse to the trough to drink. You can bring the horse to the trough. If it decides to drink, very good. If it doesn't, what can you do? Again, if it's behavior that's going to cause serious problems, you do what you can to try and stop it. But if you can't, you can't. But I'm not necessarily talking about those cases. Whatever, you ask the question, so you wouldn't, in that case, you wouldn't have an obligation. You wouldn't have an obligation. But in any other case, they're struggling, they're only on disability, they have a certain, I don't know, their heating system blows. Let's say. So they are, they're in a house or an apartment now, the heating system blew, it's freezing cold, they're on disability, they're on money to get a new one. You're going to let them freeze? Now, some people say, they deserve it. Okay. Not talking about that case. Persons don't want to see the parents freeze. So they'll do what they can to help. If they can't help, try and find other people to help. But that'd be an obligation to help them. If they're not doing things that are detrimental to, other things. Yeah, yeah, that's what I would say. Azazel, someone asked about that. Why is the fallen one brought forbidden knowledge? Wasn't even knowledge for the Garden of Eden forbidden knowledge? No. Well, I shouldn't say no. God said don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Now, if God knows past, present, future, doesn't God know man? He knows what man's going to do. So if he totally forbade it, couldn't he have made it in such a way that they would have no access to it at all? Put short little fat kids, cherubs in front of it with fiery, with fire and swords and this and that, so they stay away from it. God could have made the world in such a way where even quote unquote forbidden knowledge, it would be impossible for man to get to. But you make it in a certain way, right? I'll give an example. After Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, God throws them out of the garden. Before he throws them out of the garden, he puts these fiery angels around the tree of life. So no one will go near it. Now, why did he do that? Because eating from the tree of knowledge, what did it do? It brought death to the world. Now, death is a partial atonement, not full atonement for a person's sins. Right? It's an atonement, but not a full atonement. Now, even if that's the case, the person has to die and go into the ground. That's partial atonement. If a person ate from the tree of life, fame, right? They're going to live forever. That you can't have that. 100% you can't have that because then they won't get atonement. They'll live forever, but they won't get atonement. They won't get atonement over here. So what does God do? So God put these fiery angels in front of the tree of life, banished man, and even if he came back, they'll be too afraid to go near these angels, to eat from the tree of life. Now, couldn't have God done that with the tree of knowledge? God could have made it, and so he could have put, I don't know, humongous animal, serpent, who knows what, around the tree that man would never eat from it. It would be impossible for man to eat from it. Now the Medrash says that the fruit of the tree of knowledge, whatever it was, some say it was grapes, some say it was wheat, some say it was figs, right? Not 100% clear exactly what it was. Whatever the tree was, the fruit of the tree was very desirable, extremely desirable. Now, if it would have been knowledge that God 100% did not want man to touch, we're talking like man will never get this knowledge, then God could have made it in such a way where man never would have been enticed to get there. Yeah, he could have made, all the fruits look like garbage and smell like garbage, so man's not going to go near it. He could have done any number of things so man wouldn't touch it, but he didn't do that. What did he do? He made it extremely desirable, and man was tempted, and the snake tempted, and this is what happened. Now, if it had been 100% forbidden knowledge, then that never would have happened. In other words, God would never have given them an opportunity to do that. Never. Not in 100 lifetimes, 1,000 lifetimes, a million lifetimes. He never would have done that. So since God never would have done it, they would never had an opportunity to do it. So even though technically you tell me, okay, it was forbidden to eat from it, God did not make it impossible. He gave them free choice. Knowing they could eat from the tree, knowing that they probably would eat from the tree. So if it was outright 100% forbidden, then God should have made it 100% impossible for man to eat from the tree. 100%. So the fact that man ate from the tree, and now we have a evil inclination. Very good. So okay, it's a different world. That's a different world. Somebody asked, why's Rabbi Kiva calling up Tornus Rufus from the dead, asking him about the afterlife? What's the problem? What's the problem? Because it's necromancy, sorcery. Right? How can it bring up the soul? You see, the Gemara says that in many cases. Brings up Titus, brings up JC, yeah, brings up other people. They say it's not forbidden. They say it's not forbidden. Yeah, they got knowledge of the afterworld and what's going on there and what judgment is. Right? We've spoken about Titus before. Yeah, they ask different people, what, should you attach to the Jewish people? Should people attach to the Jewish people? What's your punishment where you are? Now, it seems pretty practical. Maybe scare people, see what's going on in that world. But we know from Titus very clear, we mentioned this many times, right? That he said that, he said what his punishment was, but we know that before he died, he said the body should be cremated and the ashes spread over the seven seas so the God of Israel can't judge him. So they asked him what's his punishment. And he said his punishment is God gathers all his ashes and kills them again, burns them again, every day for eternity. It's kind of scary if you think about it. Right? So you learn things about the afterlife. That's not forbidden. You hear things about, what judgment's like in that world. Right? But the fundamental question is good question. How can they bring up these souls in order to do it? Really, sorcery is forbidden. Right? Bringing up souls is forbidden. Now, it could be if it has a genuine purpose and you're teaching something from it, maybe it's okay. That's the question, I think, by King Saul bringing up the witches, and using the witches, bringing up souls or whatever. The whole question about that, how is he allowed to do that? Yeah. But here, there's a benefit. There's definitely a direct benefit. You hear how evil people are judged. That should scare people. Or that should show people that, God is righteous, and people who go against them and seriously go against them, there is going to be serious payback. Right? So you can bring that to the world and show people. And now, should you be bringing up souls in general? No. That, definitely not. Now, what if it's got this purpose, whatever? It could be. Certain cases it'd be okay. Under certain circumstances. But in general, yeah, you're right. It should be forbidden. 100% it should be forbidden. So in certain cases, in the case of bringing up the witches, and all that, very good. Yeah, so how are they allowed to do that? Good. That's the whole question. All right, that's the whole question, how he did it. Why? How is he allowed to do it? Now, there are certain times things are done, what we call a harashah. It's done for that particular time. Not that it should be done at all times. But, there was a certain time it was needed for this. So therefore the rabbis allowed it. But in general, be forbidden. 100% it'd be forbidden. Under certain circumstances, yes. Or under specific circumstances, let's say better. Then you say it's okay. Otherwise, you're not allowed to. Not allowed to. Someone says, if a Jew stops learning Torah and looks at nature, we go to hell. I answered this question already. Go back to one of my Q&As. Answered it. The answer is no. Yeah, but I already answered the question. Regarding guided regressions, it's witchcraft. I would tell you, according to Kabbalah, in general, the way it was explained to me, a person will never know past life experience in this world. Now, I asked this rabbi of mine, blessed memory, who was very much steeped in Kabbalah, I asked him, what about deep regression? Where a person can recount past lives, supposedly. Yeah? So, he didn't believe it. He didn't think it was true, but he didn't have an answer. He didn't have an answer why that's, people have done it. Seemingly people have done it and have brought out other people's past life experiences. Now, my simplistic answer, which may not be true, so you can take this with a grain of salt, is that it could be when a person's alive, when they're awake. We don't believe in deja vu. So Whatever a person feels doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The bottom line is you'll never know what you've done, your soul has done in a past life while you are awake. Now, it could be, probably not true, but, I'll throw it out there. It could be that when a person's in deep hypnosis and way under, they could recall it. That's not when they're awake. Again, I'm not saying that's an answer. I'm saying it's a possible answer, probably a bad answer, right? But according to Kabbalah, the way it was explained to me, that should never be able to be asked. That should never happen. Should never happen. In other words, when the soul goes in the body, it will never know what it's doing here. And while the person is still alive, they'll never know. They'll never know what the soul has done in the past. Never. Yeah? So how do you explain it? I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer about past regression. Yeah, there are people who've done it. They talk about, they're alive in the 1800s and they were this and they were that and, and they did other things. So I don't have an answer. According to Kabbalah, that should not be the case. That should not be possible, according to Kabbalah. It should never be possible. The question is, if a person's awake, let's say, we'll make it very clear. If a person's awake, will they ever know? No. They may think they know, but they'll never know. They'll never know. Now, if they're asleep or they're under a hypnosis, they're not awake. Yeah? Could someone bring about the past life experience? Some people say absolutely. Yeah? Some will say, again, I'm not, certainly an expert in this. Some would say that this is not a contradiction. Right? Deep regression is not a contradiction of what we said. Yeah. So, I can't say. I can only tell you what a great rabbi once explained to me, that according to Kabbalah, that should not be able to be the case. The way I understood, should not be able to be the case. It's a witchcraft. It's not witchcraft. Definitely not witchcraft. Yeah. It's hypnosis. Hypnosis is not witchcraft. If they're using sorcery to do it, then yeah, it's a problem. But they're not using, as far as I understand, deep regression is not witchcraft. It's not sorcery. That's not what sorcery is. Yeah. If they're using, different things through sorcery to do that, yeah, that would be forbidden. But if it's not sorcery, then it shouldn't be a problem. If they're not using sorcery, then it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. So bottom line, is it sorcery? No. I wouldn't say it's sorcery. Someone asks, is recording the Gemara a different farm? The story of Rabbi Kiva. It's the Gemara brings about. Could be the Gemara, could be the Medrash. I think the Gemara brings out. Certainly by Titus and JC and others. It's the Gemara brings it up. Could be other sources also. But definitely the Gemara brings it up. Someone asked, child who designs said he remembers being part of the Gucci family. His mother took him to Italy and recalls some details. I don't know, I can't answer. People say a lot of things. There's a book called Many Lies, Many Masters, Many Masters, Many Lies by Brian Weiss, and he put people under deep hypnosis, and talking about past life experiences. I gave it to somebody to look at, and asked if it was legit. Right? And the person who read it basically said there are a lot of things mixed in there with Buddhism and other things that they didn't believe it was true. And I get trolled by somebody, well, not anymore really, but about priests and Catholics doing all kinds of exorcisms and why Jews can't do it and this and that, and if there was a demon in someone's body, blah blah blah, they're gonna call a priest, and you got all these things, all these videos, let's say, showing people being healed and exorcisms and this and that. I don't believe for 1 second these things are true. Yeah, they can claim whatever they want. Yeah. A lot of people A lot of people could have like serious mental illness and they're being propped up to do this. Yeah, to go through whatever they're going through in order to prove that what they're doing is right. Yeah, I mean anything, right? So in this case, in this case, child says, "Remember, okay, he remembers." Child's got no believability. Child said, if a child was clinically dead and out of body experience, okay, that might be a different thing. Child says he remembers this and remembers that. Child has no believability for anything. For anything. Yeah. As a child. So, you can tell me, they thought this or they remember this. It doesn't have any credibility. There's no credibility. Even if an adult said it, I doubt if it would have any credibility. But all the more so if a child said it. If a child said it, why would I believe them? I believe everything a child says? Make up all kinds of things. I said, no, they saw a vision. Nobody sees visions today. Wackos see visions today. The only people that have prophecy are little children or imbeciles. Great rabbis may have divine inspiration, the lowest form of, what do you call it? The lowest form of prophecy. Okay. Anyone else that says, like, God came to him, this, that, they're wackos. You don't take them seriously. There's no reason to take them seriously. No, if a king had a dream or something like that, you take that more seriously. You take it more seriously. Yeah, because, God could be directing them for different things. So, yeah, so that might be something different. But, a child says, I remember this, I remember that. So, who cares what they say? Children in general have no believability whatsoever. None. None. So they say I can all handle one life at a time. Yeah. I think if people find out what they did in their past lives and what they're doing here, I don't know. I think some people may be shocked, maybe not. Maybe not. Someone asked how God punished Adam and Eve when Adam and Eve didn't know right from wrong. That's not true. God gave him a command. Read the Torah. Go back and read it. What does the Torah say? God says, eat from any tree you want in the garden. Right, I'm paraphrasing here. Eat from any tree you want in the garden. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge. So when God says we'll be Karaites here, we're not going to bring in any rabbinic interpretation. God says, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. 7 words. In 7 words or less, what does it mean? Do not eat from the tree of knowledge. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. That's what it means. I cut it down to 5 words. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. So what do you mean they didn't know? Of course they knew. God told them. Torah makes that very clear. God says, eat from any tree you want. Very good. Very good. Eat from whatever tree you want. So what? That's great. But God says, don't eat from this tree. So what does don't eat from this tree mean? Don't eat from it. What do you mean they didn't have knowledge? Of course they had knowledge. They had plenty of knowledge. When they ate from the tree, they got different knowledge. There's a whole different way of looking at things. Okay. But who says they didn't have knowledge? Right? Right? Adam and Eve, evil was outside of them. So, if, let's say they're walking in the forest. They're walking in the forest, they see a pit. They see a pit in the forest. Why don't they jump into the pit? Right? Let's ask a very basic question. Why don't they jump into the pit? Because they understand if they jump in the pit, something could happen to them. Now, they don't understand about death. They don't understand what death is per se. Okay. But if they jump in the pit or they fall in the pit, don't they realize? Don't they understand that could be dangerous? They had knowledge. We look at man as like they didn't know anything. It's not true. They had knowledge. Evil was outside of them. They knew what was right and wrong. Take Cain and Abel. Why does Cain try and hide? Yeah, not admit. Yeah, God says, where's Abel? He said, what am I, my brother's guardian? Yeah. He said, his blood from all his descendants are crying out to me. Cain didn't understand murder was forbidden. This is before the Torah was given. How did he not understand? He felt guilty. God wanted him to repent. Very good. He didn't know that was wrong? Of course he knew it was wrong. So why did he do it? Oh, good discussion. What was the argument? Good discussion. But they had an argument. They had an argument. He ended up killing him. And they felt bad. Why did he feel bad? He felt he was justified. Okay. But he understood he did something wrong. So now you tell me Cain and Abel didn't have knowledge? Of course they had knowledge. They had universal knowledge. But they also understood things outside of them, even if they, things that were bad. Things that were bad, they understood. They definitely understood. The problem was, once they ate from the tree of knowledge, then it was a whole different thing. Then that's a whole different thing, a whole different world. Right? Read the book Derech Hashem, which speaks about what the world looked like before and after. Adam and Eve ate from the tree. Doesn't mean they didn't have knowledge. They had knowledge. For sure they had knowledge. Yeah, now the world is different. Now the way they look at the world is different. Doesn't mean they didn't have knowledge. They certainly had knowledge. That's what I say. Is using herbs and plants for medicinal properties bad? No. Definitely do that. It's not a problem. A person goes to, let's say, a homeopath. Now, traditional doctors may say they don't do anything, they don't have the power to do anything, they're a bunch of quacks. Okay, right? But, if someone's using, herbs and plants, medicinal purposes, they know what they're doing, what's the problem? Right? It shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, as long as it doesn't hurt them. Yeah, if they had a major disease, would I tell them to do that? Not necessarily. Yeah, I'm much more traditional in that sense. Right? But, let's say a person has a certain disease, and no cure. Or they say there's nothing more we can do. So what do? So you do alternative things. Should a person do alternative things first? No. I wouldn't tell people to do that. They choose to do that, that's their choice. But, there are cases, people who went, used alternative medicine, and then things got so bad, traditional medicine didn't help them. Now, again, you could say they're going to die anyway, or whatever. Who says traditional medicine would have helped them? Okay. Right? You can play those odds. Who says that could have helped? Maybe it wouldn't. Okay. Even if it would. Even if it would, you don't go to homeopathy. I wouldn't tell people to go to homeopathy first. In general. But can a person use herbs for different things? Sure. I don't think it's a problem. Definitely don't think it's a problem. What would you say to Christians who say the Talmud was not mentioned in the Torah? It doesn't have to be mentioned in the Torah. When the Torah says a lot of times, the Torah will mention, it'll say mitzvosai, v'torosai. My mitzvahs and my Toros. Plural. What Torah is he talking about? Why is Torah in the plural? What's the answer? Because it can't be talking about one Torah. Torah is only in the singular. So it must be talking about another Torah. What's the other Torah? Oral law. Right? Either it's not mentioned in the Torah, right? That's one thing. You have a number of cases like that where it's hinted at. But I would even tell you more basic. Even if it's not mentioned in the Torah begs for explanation. So the Torah is only a law book, right? And it tells me don't do this or don't do that. The Torah does not give me any definitions. The Torah tells me, Leviticus chapter 23, you're supposed to take a nice smelling fruit with your palm fronds, willows, and myrtle leaves. Any idea what a nice smelling fruit is? Any idea what a sukkah is? Does a sukkah have walls? Does a sukkah have a roof? How many walls? What does it mean to sit in it 7 days? I have no definitions. Laws of Shabbos, if I don't get it right, death penalty. Yeah, so how do I know what they are? I know 3. I know 3 of the laws. Yeah, I'm obligated. I can't light a fire, I can't cook, and I can't carry on the Sabbath. And you can say, well, there are a lot more categories. Very good. But you can't give the death penalty if you don't know what it is. So even if it's not written directly in the Torah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, the fact is there has to be commentary. Because most of the Torah, you're not going to know what to do. You're not going to know how to perform it. The Torah says, give one other example. The Torah says, don't put frontlets between your eyes. Any idea what a frontlet is? The word in Hebrew is totafot. Totafot's not even a Hebrew word, Rashi says. Right? Rashi says it's an African word. Tot in African, back in the day, meant four. What does four mean? Four compartments. But how would you know? Even the Karaites, who don't believe in oral law, they have tefillin. Where do they get tefillin from? How do they know what tefillin is? So there has to be an explanation. There has to be a running explanation. We call that oral law. Right? Regardless of whether it's written explicitly or not, that doesn't matter. Right? Right? I even say more basic. 39 years in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching the Jewish people Torah. I'd ask a very simple question. Let's say there are 3 million people. 3 million people in the desert, 613 commandments. How long would it take if Moses trained thousands of teachers? How long would it take for Moses to teach the Jewish people the law? 5 years? 3 million people is a lot of people. I get it. Okay, 10 years? 20 years? You want to tell me it's going to take 40 years to teach them? That's a lot. That's a long time to teach 613 commandments. So what's he teaching them? To memorize the commandments, very easy to do. To understand what the commandments are, don't kill. Okay, very good. Right? Don't kill. Yeah, what about euthanasia? Is that murder? What about self-defense? Is that murder? What are my definitions? Say, well, it's a good question. How are we supposed to know? That's why I have an oral tradition, right? That's the answer. That's one answer. That's what I would say on that. On second, let's look at this four walls. Yeah, how do you know that? How do you know that? You only know it from moral law, right? Who's the freedom tree of life intended for? Nobody. Nobody's supposed to eat from the tree of life. Yeah. It was there in the garden. What's the reason? Good question. No one's supposed to eat from it. It wasn't intended for anybody. It's intended for the beauty of the tree. That was it. But no one should eat from it. Maybe the program fear of heights and loud noises. Okay. All the stories is a description of good and evil that Adam and Eve learned from the tree. Evil now is part of a person. Everyone's got an evil inclination, right? It made it worse, right? 100% it made it worse. So good and evil, Adam and Eve understood good and evil before, but now it's a whole different ballgame because now it's inside a person. Once good and evil's inside a person, then it's much harder to fight. Much, much harder to fight. It's part of your psyche. It's part of who you are. Makes it much, much harder. But they know there are good things and bad things, right? They knew outside there were good things and bad things, even before they ate from the tree of knowledge. Yeah, eating from the tree of knowledge now just amplified it more. Amplified it a lot more. Someone says it's cruelty bad. Of course it's bad. Can't be cruel to animals. By us killing animals in general, we're allowed to use them for whatever we want, as long as we don't abuse them. You can't abuse animals. Can't, onus devarim, calling people names and certain things. You're not allowed to do that. Bullying, 100% forbidden. I mean, a lot of prohibition. A lot of prohibitions to be cruel. Right? People say we're cruel to animals because we use their skins, we do other things, but that's not cruel. We're allowed to use animals for whatever we want as long as we don't abuse them. Right? Being cruel to other people, that's forbidden. Totally forbidden. Yeah, totally forbidden. Animal sacrifice is not cruel. It's a divine command. How can a divine command be cruel? Because people say, it's primeval. Why would God want us to sacrifice animals? Because he does. Yeah, he wants that animal is sanctified to God through its death. That's not cruel. That's a form of sacrifice, right? If we understood better what sacrifices are, no one asks the question. Well, they think it's cruel. They think it's backwards. They don't know what sacrifice represents. What does the word sacrifice mean? Yeah, in Hebrew, it's korban. What's the root of the word korban? Kufresh beis. What does kufresh beis mean? Draw close. So when a person brought a sacrifice, let's say a sin offering, that sacrifice should have been them. They should have been killed. But that animal takes the place of them. So you can tell me, but the animal didn't do anything wrong. Very good. It didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, but God had mercy. Instead of killing you, he killed the animal. Yeah, sanctified the animal when you should have died. That's using the animal for a higher purpose. That's not cruel. Choosing for a higher purpose. Yeah. But I would tell you, I would say in general, when you look at the book of Leviticus, most people don't have a clue what it's about. And the reason is because we don't have contact with animal sacrifices today. People think it's backwards, it's medieval, it's this, and, as the question goes, it's cruel. Animals were created for us to use in any way, shape, or form. God says very clearly, and if God is good, right, he says very clearly, use the sacrifice for this, for that, for the other thing. Obviously for a higher purpose. So how's that cruel? And what are they going to answer? They're not going to like this answer. But what are they going to answer? Because the animal didn't do anything wrong. It didn't have to do anything wrong. So what did the animal do? It was used to sanctify God's name through the sacrifice. That's what it's used for. That's what it's used for. Why didn't God tell us how old Adam was when he begat Cain and Abel and only Seth? Because Seth was the way that he was the most important player here. Why? Because through Adam comes shame. Through shame comes Noah. Through Noah comes Abraham and the Abraham line. Through Isaac, Jacob, and the Jewish people. So therefore, Seth is a major player. Much major player for the sake of Jewish history. For the beginning of Jewish history. So therefore, the Torah will mention Adam and his descendants, and how old he was through Seth, right? And not through Cain and Abel, right? Obviously, Abel died, right? And Cain's not going to have a portion in that, so it has to go through the other brother, right? And the other brother is Seth, so that's why we mentioned there. Yeah. Any other questions? Someone asked, "Is an honor for an animal sacrifice?" Yes. Now, someone says, "Yeah, what about the sweet smell of the burnings?" God doesn't have a nose, right? He doesn't have big schnoz. He's like, it's like, what, is the smell of meat beautiful? What is the reach nichoach? What is the beautiful smell? Rashi said it's not about physical smell. Can't be about physical smell. What's the beauty of the smell? Rashi says it's that when God commands the Jew to do that, God enjoys it very much. That we fulfill what he said to do. That's the pleasant aroma. Not that it's an aroma in general, but that's the pleasant aroma. The fact that we do what God says. Because even though you say it's nice, pleasing aroma to God, God has no nose. He's got no form. Right? It's just an anthropomorphism, but he doesn't have any form. God doesn't have any form, then it's not about a smell. It can't be about a smell. Right? So Rashi says very clearly, Rashi says on the spot. Rashi says it's a reference to what? It's a reference to the fact that we do what God says. That's the beauty. Right? That is the smell itself. That's the smell itself. All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday. Back on track here, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, feel free. You can find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&As, Ethics My Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COF